Hey, thanks for clicking on this YouTube video. If you don't know much about Cape Cod Church, you can check us out online at capecodchurch.com. In the meantime, enjoy this message from our current series, Meant to Be, a New Vision for Being Human.
So, here we are, week 3 in a series that we've called Meant to Be. And we're talking about the prophets. So maybe the way to set the stage for this so that we can get the most out of it would be to say that the Bible is the story of God's work in the world. And one of the storylines in that book is God's faithfulness. It's just meant to remind us that no matter what happens, God is faithful. And to set the stage for all of human history for that, the Old Testament is the story of how God proves and illustrates his faithfulness to one man and one people, so that we could look back on the covenant that God made with Abraham and how God was faithful in sticking with it even when his people broke their covenant. That's really at the heart of that Old Testament story. God's faithfulness, his covenant promise to Abraham and to Israel, and then how often it was that they would break that covenant. And that becomes an opportunity to show how faithful God is. And when we look at that, we see how faithful God is to us. You see, the message was God made a covenant with his people. And then that covenant was broken. So God sends the prophet. By the way, nobody likes it when the prophet shows up. Nobody says, "Oh, we should invite the prophet to our party. That would be awesome." Like, the prophet never gets invited to anything, right? He's like the least favorite guy. But God sends a prophet because they need to hear the message that God has made a covenant with you, but you've broken that covenant. And then they say, "Well, how have we broken the covenant?" And the prophets say, "I thought you'd never ask. You have committed idolatry. Your nation is riddled with injustice, and you have created unfaithful alliances." Idolatry, injustice, unfaithful alliances. Last week, we took the middle one of those. We sort of, I liken it to ripping the Band-Aid off all at once and getting the painfulest moment out. But now I want to backtrack to idolatry, because I actually think that there's a process here of idolatry, injustice, unfaithful alliances. But we've wrestled through a bit of injustice. That isn't to say we've conquered it, but we've wrestled with it. And now we come back to this idea of idolatry. And the prophets have so much to say about it. Let me read to you some of the words of the prophets. The prophet Isaiah in chapter 45 says, "Gather together and come, you fugitives from surrounding nations. What fools they are who carry around their wooden idols and pray to gods who cannot save." The prophet Jeremiah in chapter 7 says, "No wonder I am so angry. Watch how the children gather wood and fathers build sacrificial fires. See how the women knead dough and make cakes to offer to the Queen of Heaven, and they pour out liquid offerings to their other idol gods." Chapter 11 of the prophet Jeremiah says, "Then the people of Judah and Jerusalem will pray to their idols, and they'll burn incense before them. But the idols will not save them when disaster strikes." In chapter 10, the prophet says this. I love this. He says, their ways are futile and foolish. They cut down a tree And a craftsman carves an idol. They decorate it with gold and silver, and then fasten it securely with a hammer and nails so it won't fall over. Do you get the sarcasm there? They nail it up so it won't fall over. Their gods are like helpless scarecrows in a cucumber field. You gotta love the prophet Jeremiah. They're like helpless scarecrows in a cucumber field. I mean, the prophet is calling it out for what it is. They cannot speak, and they need to be carried because they cannot walk. Do not be afraid of such gods, for they can neither harm you nor do you any good. Lord, there is none like you, for you are great, and your name is full of power. The prophet Micah said in chapter 5, I will destroy all your idols and sacred pillars, so you will never again worship the work of your own hands. And then the prophet Habakkuk in chapter 2 says, what good is a carved idol by man, or a cast image that deceives you? How foolish to trust in your own creation, a God that can't even talk. What sorrow awaits you who say to wooden idols, wake up and save us. To speechless stone images you say, rise up and teach us. Can an idol tell you what to do? They may be overlaid with gold and silver, but they are lifeless inside. Whew. But maybe you read that and you think, yeah, that's awesome. Not an issue, Ben. Not an issue. It's been a long time since I cut down a tree, got out my whittling knife, slapped some gold and silver on it, and created myself a graven image. Maybe you've been like many others, you've read the Ten Commandments. We all try and obey the Ten Commandments. We can't quote them, but we can obey them. That was a little sarcasm for you. Go ahead in your head. 1, 2, 3. Well, let me help you out. The first one says, thou shalt have no other gods before me. It starts off with idolatry. You know what the second one says? You shall not make any graven images. That's right. The first 2 of 10 are about idolatry. And maybe you're thinking, yeah, number 1, read that, check. Number 2, check. Like, Ben, I feel like this is an archaic kind of law. Like idolatry's not an issue anymore. And I would grant you that most of us haven't gone out and cut down a tree and shaped it into a god and hung some earrings off it and told the kids to bow down and worship that which gave them everything they had. But maybe we need to look a little bit deeper at what idolatry is in the scriptures. You see, to do this, we have to go all the way back to the beginning, like the very beginning, the book of Genesis, the first chapter in Genesis. Because idolatry, idols, are images, sometimes graven, carved, sometimes made, created, but they are always, always, always a reflection of what's in our heart. They're reflections of what we believe in and what we trust in. Here's what it says in Genesis chapter 1 in verse 27. So God created human beings in his own image. That doesn't mean that we physically look like God. That means that we bear in us a marking, a design, an image that's different than any other piece of creation. No other animal, no matter how cute or how special to you, bears the image of God. They may have been created by God. They may have value. You may see a beautiful sunset or an incredible oceanscape or a mountain scene, and those things are beautiful, and they show us something about the glory and majesty of God, but only you and me were made in the image of God. And because we're made in the image of God, we are meant literally to reflect the image of God to the world. Now here's where idolatry comes in. Whenever you or I love something so much, trust in something so much that it takes over in our heart and our life the place that rightly belongs to God, something happens. We begin to reflect that thing. That image has taken over the image of God, the place where it was, and we begin to reflect that thing that we love, that thing that we trust, that thing that has become the most important thing to us, has taken over our heart and now is reflected out. And in that place, in that time, that thing becomes our idol. You see, almost anything could be an idol. In fact, the best things, especially, are prone to becoming our idols. Those good things in our life that we come to believe in, trust in, love so much that they take over the place that belonged to God. But man, idols are hard to find. I mean, they look okay, they look good, but hunting them out, whew. Here's a hint. If you want to find where your idols may be hiding, ask yourself what you're anxious about and what you're angry about. Usually, our anxiety and our anger are linked to the things that we're most trusting in, that most matter to us, that we're most afraid of losing because we've put everything in that basket. That's where we have to look. That's where we have to be cautious, because that thing has taken up residence in my heart and has become possibly the most important, and its image is being reflected out. What am I anxious about? What am I angry about? Often, not always, but often, I can trace those things back to something that's dangerously close to being an idol. Here's another one. I heard somebody say this recently, and at first I was like, and then I went, What are you anxious about? What do you get angry about? Here's another one. What do you have nightmares about? I don't have that many nightmares. Maybe occasionally. I had one the other day. I thought, well, if I'm going to preach on it, I ought to say it. I mean, it started out good. It was church, too. It was like a church. I'm going to tell you, so don't judge me, all right? We were in church, and it was Sunday, and it was full. Like everybody was here. I was so excited. Now you know what I love. It was like everybody here. It was like one service, and the place was full. I was like, yes, finally, Corona. And I'm getting ready to preach. And then, in my dream, I realize I can't find my Bible. Now, I've had this one before, because my Bible's got my notes. I can't find it. And I've had that dream before. It's like, but now this time I can't find my Bible, and I can't find my microphone. And there's a third. I was barefoot. Truly, I mean, I was like, I'm running around the church barefoot without a microphone, and it's time. Like Alan's playing extra verses of the song while I'm trying to figure it out. And somebody sitting right over in this section had a microphone and they handed it to me. It was the weirdest thing. I'm like, who carries a microphone to church? I'm like, why do you have a microphone? Will this work? Is this fake? Is this? And I put it on, and it was this big bulky thing, but I was like, I don't care. Will it work with our system? And in my head, by the way, I've got a message that is like, I'm ready to go anytime. Like I got to preach, and I don't have a note like Luke 15. I'm ready, man. You know, the lost sheep, the lost coin, the lost boy. I can preach that stuff all day long. So in my mind, I'm like, I'm just preaching Luke 15 this morning. I'm doing this in my night. I got a microphone, but I'm barefoot. I'm like, I can't go up there. I'm like, Brittany, you got to go home. Get me some shoes. I don't care. Just get me a pair of shoes. I don't care. Sneakers, whatever. I need some shoes. Now I woke up from that. I'm like, that was a weird dream, man. That was some crazy pizza. No more from that place, right? Here's what I'm saying. If you want to look for where your idol is hiding, then look at your anxiety, look at your anger. If that doesn't work for you, flip it on the other side. You want to know why you're anxious. You want to know why that bitterness doesn't let you go, because maybe it's attached to something that you've grown to love too much. And God is saying that thing has taken up residence deep in your life where it's not meant to be. Tim Keller says, and I think this is helpful, he says there are two kinds of idols. There's deep idols and surface idols. Surface idols are the things that you're used to. You know, surface idol could be like the prophets were talking about, the idols of Baal, right? It could be the Baal idol, or a surface idol could be your 401k, or the car that you have, or the house that you're dreaming of, or maybe the job that you have. Those things are all surface idols, but surface idols are often things that are even more meaningful, right? They're relationships. A surface idol can be your spouse, or the spouse that you want. It just becomes so important, everything in your life, that your trust, your confidence, it's like a crushing burden on them and on you has been placed in them. Or it can be your children, right? Like it's not just that we love them, we've come to a place where we need them, like they've taken up this place of trust that belong to God. And here's the thing about surface idols. Surface idols are always pawns of our deep idols. See, there's only two deep idols: power and influence, and approval and appreciation. At our deepest part, there's just something in us that's desperate for power and influence. We crave it and we want it. And then on the other side, there's approval and appreciation. We just need those two things wrestle for preeminence in our life. And you can see how the surface idol is the pawn of the deep idol, right? Like so that money that is taken up such a prominent, that 401k, that job, those things, that they serve that desperate need for power, for influence. That relationship that you have, or that you want to have, becomes that place that serves the idol of approval and appreciation in your life. It's like, I got to have it. There's nothing else in life that matters. I just need to have that. John Calvin, I don't often quote John Calvin, but John Calvin said this, and it's good. He says, the human heart is an idol factory. Boy, that is the truth. Idol. It's just easy. It's just easy for stuff, created stuff, to take over. And when it does, it makes me something less than I was meant to be. I like what Tom Wright says when he says, we are made in the image of God, and when we worship anything else, we become less human. I remember reading that the first time and thinking, that's an awkward thing, less human. How can you become less human? You become less than, to use the phrase from our series, less than you were meant to be. Because you've worshiped, loved something else so much that it's taken over. And now it, instead of the image of God, is being reflected out of you. And at its source, it creates this anxiousness, this bitterness, because we know idols are easy to create. They're easy to follow, but they can't deliver. We live in constant fear because we know this thing that I put all of my hope, all of my trust in, can't really deliver. And this is why the prophets come. And they say, come back. You see, I have this thought that we're made in the image of God, and nothing can take that away. Nothing can remove that. So the image of God is always calling us, always. It's like pulling us back towards Him. And the prophets are the instrument. They're like, whoa, hey. No, you're not meant for that. In fact, in the Old Testament, there's this prophet royal rumble. Those of you who grew up in church, you'll remember this story where 450 prophets of Baal, you remember this, do battle against one. Like it's literally like the Super Bowl prophet showdown, like WrestleMania, MMA, whatever it is that you watch. Like they come together on the top of the mountain. A little bit of context might be helpful here. God came to the prophet Elijah. He says, hey, prophesy to Ahab and the nation of Israel that there's going to be a drought, a famine in the land. There's going to be no rain because my people have turned away. They've broken the covenant. And so here's the judgment to draw them back to me so they'll hear my voice and listen to me. And so the drought continues. Ahab, the longer it goes on, the angrier he is with this prophet. Remember I said nobody invites the prophet to the party because the prophet's always the problem. And Ahab's like, this prophet is the one. He's the problem. And finally, a long time passes and God comes to Elijah and he says, all right, it's time. I think I got their attention. So you go tell Ahab and you tell the prophets of Baal to meet you. And they have this showdown. They come to the top of Mount Carmel. And Elijah says, here's what we're going to do. We're going to have a contest, and we're going to see which God it is that can deliver. He says, here's what I want you to do. You build your altar, and then you take this bull, and you sacrifice it on the altar, but don't light it. You just pray, and you pray that your God will light your altar on fire. And then I'll go. And we'll see which God is God. And we don't have time to read the whole story. You should go back and read it because Elijah is one sarcastic prophet. He's awesome, right? So he's up there and they put their altar together and they put the bull on the altar and they start praying to Baal and nothing. And they're getting desperate and the day's going along and they're praying louder and louder and louder. And then Elijah shows up and he starts taunting them and he says, hey, maybe your God is asleep or on vacation. Maybe you should yell a little bit louder. And this just makes them angrier and they start cutting themselves. And then finally at the end of the day, they just give up. And then Elijah says, okay, my turn. And Elijah goes out and he takes 12 stones representing the 12 tribes of Israel and he rebuilds the altar of God. And he takes that bull and he sacrifices it there. And then he does something else. He goes and he takes the most precious commodity in the nation. He takes water, buckets and buckets and buckets and buckets of water, and he dumps it over the altar until it's drenched and water is running down into a trench around it and it's full of muddy water. And then he steps back and he prays. Here's what he prays in 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 37. Oh, Lord, answer me. Answer me so these people will know that you, O Lord, our God, and that you have brought them back to yourself. Answer these people so they will know. Give them a moment of clarity about who they are trusting in. Immediately, verse 38, the fire of the Lord flashed down from heaven and burned up the young bull, the wood, the stone, and the dust. It even licked up all the water in the trench. So they will know. You see, there's always that moment of clarity where you begin to realize that something's taken up residence in your heart. You've been trusting in something that can't deliver. And it might not be that thing is a bad thing. It might be a good thing, but it's not a God thing, right? You've been putting your trust, your faith, your confidence in that thing. And there's this moment of clarity when you realize that the source of my anxiety and the source of my bitterness and my anger is that I'm trusting in something I shouldn't be trusting in. And Elijah is praying that they would have that moment of clarity, like show them so they can see. Some years ago, I was in, and it's been 15 or more years ago. I was in China on a missions trip, and working with some of our partners there. And we had a day off. And we were going through one of the markets. It was an indoor market. If you've never been to an indoor Chinese market, it's wild. Like, they sell everything there. It's all fake, but they sell everything. Like, literally everything is for sale, and it's cheap. You're just like, really? Ray-Bans? This is like, it'll say like Ray-Ben instead of Ray-Ban, which for me works, but for you probably doesn't. And there was this one booth. It's in Beijing. It's called the Silk Road Marketplace. And I went in, and there was lots of booths, but I came on one, and they were selling watches. And I've always loved watches. I mean, they had beautiful, beautiful watches. And I bought one. I wore it today, actually. I brought it for you. They're I don't know, they're like $10. They call them copy watches. They're copies of the real thing. This is a copy of a $10,000 watch. Very good. I mean, the little things for 10 and 2 fell off a while ago, but I roughly know where 10 o'clock is. Like, I sort of know it's 11:55, right? So I can sort of. I mean, it works pretty well. In fact, I brought it home, and I was so proud of it. There's a friend in the church who deals in these kind of high-end watches, like buys, sells, resells. There's a whole market for them, and so I was so excited to show him how awesome it was. I'm like, look at this! I got for $10, and he's like, that's about right. He was not as impressed as I was, which kind of deflated me a little bit. Like, it's a nice watch. And honestly, it still sort of keeps time, which is pretty amazing. I mean, except for 10 and 2, and I think I lost 11 somewhere along the line too. That's new. But it's fake. And so here's what happened. I every time I wore it, I sort of felt this tension. I felt a little bit hypocritical. Like if somebody said, "Oh, that's a nice watch," I had to tell them, "Oh, it's fake." I mean, it's a nice watch, but it's not really what it looks like. And then after a while, I just stopped wearing it. In fact, I didn't know if it worked. I haven't worn it in years. I guess what I'm saying is there's some $10 things that are masquerading as $10,000 things. And that's a problem. There's some good things in our lives that are masquerading as God things. They've taken up a place of prominence in our soul that doesn't belong to them. And there's this moment of clarity, and it's often in the midst of anxiousness or anger that we realize that at the source of that, I've begun trusting, believing, loving something too much. I'm loving it in a way, I'm worshiping it in a way, I'm trusting it in a way that only belongs to God Himself. And in that moment, it's like a moment of clarity where I say, I need to take this thing off and set it aside. But I'm not sure it's exactly done there. Like when we set it aside, we take it off. It's like we take something out of the throne of our heart and we say, God, I need to put this thing, it might be this good thing, right over here, so that this seat is reserved for you. But then there's this place, this moment. Remember I said God is calling us back, calling us back, calling us back. And we're putting Him in that place. Elijah finishes off the prophets of Baal, like literally finishes them off. That's gory, I'll let you read that. And he says to King Ahab, God's going to send rain. See, that was the fulfillment. That's like, okay, God, we're halfway there. If you don't send rain, this does not end well. And so he sends Ahab off. And he goes off a little bit, and it says he sits down. And he puts his head between his knees. And he starts to pray. Whew, God. Please, 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 send rain. Send rain. And he tells his servant, go up to the top of the mountain. Look out over the sea in the distance and see if you see something. So here's the prophet. He's got his head between his knees and he's just praying, God, please, please, please. And the servant goes up and he looks. I'm guessing the first time he looked for a while too. And it was a cloudless day. Until finally he comes back to Elijah and he says, prophet, there's nothing. God, how can that be? How can that be? That ain't right. The prophet prays some more and he says, go look again. And he comes back. Go look again. And again. And again. And again. In verse 44, it says this, finally, the seventh time. This poor servant's been climbing up and down this mountain. He's exhausted. Prophet's still got his head between his knees, just, God, you got to show up. I need to see you. Finally, the seventh time, his servant told him, I love this. I saw a little cloud, about the size of a man's hand, rising from the sea. Woo-hoo. The prophet knew. He's like, go tell Ahab, you better get home quick. Rain is coming. You see, we take that thing out and we start praying like, God, I need you in this place, but I don't want to pretend. Sometimes we come to a place like this, we come in for worship, and man, there's something powerful about being together in worship. People have told me over and over and over again when they've come back, they said, Ben, there was just something about being in that place and something about worshiping together and lifting our voices. And it was and it becomes a God moment. Sometimes it happens there, but sometimes it happens on Monday when you're just like, God, I'm just here. It's just me and your word. And I need to hear from you, God. I need you to take up residence at the center of my life. It's been a long, long time, and it's day after day after day just going back to him again and again and again. Sometimes that seventh day, we start to see. Sometimes you've got to remove something tangible. There's an Old Testament practice became a New Testament practice, became a practice for us called fasting. Most people think of food, because food's something we eat every day, and so when you set it aside, it's noticeable. But fasting is like, I'm just going to create a little space in my life. I'm going to take something out because I want to create space. I want to bring you back into this space, God. I'm creating room, God. I recognize something is missing. I've filled it up with all of this other stuff. All of these good things became God things, but God, I'm putting them over here because something is missing, and it's you. Your presence. I just want you at the center of my worship, my life, my image. Would you bow with me? Maybe this moment is your moment just to do that very thing, just in the quiet of the moment, with, like the prophet, seated there, his head between his knees. God, I want to take this thing that's become an idol, that I've worshiped, that I've loved too much, and I'm setting it over here. I want you back where you belong. My image maker, my image creator, at the center. I want my heart and my life, my emotions and my joy. I want my anxiousness and my anger to reflect the God who made me and who loves me. So, Father, right here, we just, as it were, Father, we put our head down. We take those things off that don't belong. The $10 masquerading as a $10,000, Father. We set it aside. The good thing that's taken up the place of the God who deserves first. We invite you. We need you, Father, more than anything else, to be at the center. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
We hope you enjoyed this message from our Meant to Be series. If this is your first time with us, we'd love to get to know you better. You can fill out the Connect card using the link in the caption below. You can also use that card to let us know if you made a faith decision today or if you have a prayer request. And if you enjoyed today's message and thought of a friend who could use some encouragement from it, we hope that you'll share it with them. YouTube is one of the best ways to share content. You can easily share it via text, email, or on social media, and it may just be the encouragement that they need today. And one more thing, since you're still here. If you haven't already, we hope you'll follow us on Facebook or Instagram. And if you enjoyed today's message, we'll hope you will like this video so that others can discover it too. We'll see you next time, and thanks for joining us today.